The air in the valley was thick with dust and the acrid smell of cordite. Captain Eva Rostova pressed herself into the shallow, unforgiving ditch, the sharp rocks digging into her body armor. Each burst of enemy AK-47 fire sent a fresh shower of dirt and pebbles over her and the 3 other members of Nomad Team. The ambush had been perfect, brutal, and overwhelming. "Rostova! Talk to me, where's our air?" Master Sergeant Davis yelled over the deafening roar, firing a controlled burst over the lip of their pathetic cover. A bullet ricocheted off a rock near his head, and he ducked down with a curse. Eva's fingers, slick with sweat, tightened around the microphone of her radio. Any station, this is Nomad 01. We are in heavy contact. Request immediate KS. Grid is..." She rattled off their coordinates, her voice a forced calm that belied the panic clawing at her throat. The initial response was a gut-wrenching hiss of static. It was the same silence that haunted her dreams, the silence that had greeted her calls for help on a different mountainside 2 years ago, a silence that had cost lives. "They're not listening," she muttered, more to herself than to Davis. She could see Doc, their medic, trying to stem the bleeding from a nasty gash on the leg of their youngest member, Corporal Jensen. They were running low on ammo and hope in equal measure. Davis crawled closer, his face a mask of grit and frustration. "Try again. Make them understand. We are minutes from being overrun." He pointed towards the compound walls, where shadows were gathering for a final, decisive push. Eva keyed the mic again, her knuckles white. "Command, this is Nomad 01. The situation is critical. We are pinned down, taking effective fire from 3 sides. I say again, we are about to be overrun." Her plea was met with a crackle, then a distant, disembodied voice from a drone pilot miles away. "Nomad 01, we copy your sitrep. Stand by for command decision. Assets are contested." "Contested?" Davis spat the word like a poison. "We're dying out here and they're having a committee meeting." The enemy fire intensified. A rocket-propelled grenade slammed into the ground 10 meters to their left, the concussive blast ringing Eva's ears. Through the smoke, she saw an insurgent stand up, clear and confident, hefting another RPG onto his shoulder. He was taking his time, aiming directly into their ditch. There was nowhere to run. Doc looked up, his eyes wide with a terrible acceptance. Jensen closed his eyes. This was it. This was the end. Eva's hand instinctively went to the worn photo tucked in her vest, a final thought of her mother, a pilot who had also known what it was to be alone in a dangerous sky. Then, it happened. A sound unlike any other on the battlefield cut through the chaos. It wasn't the pop of an AK or the blast of an RPG. It was a sharp, precise, and utterly final crack that echoed down from the high ridges. The insurgent with the RPG jerked violently backward as if struck by an invisible giant, the weapon clattering harmlessly to the ground. A surreal silence fell over the immediate area. The enemy advance faltered. The relentless firing stuttered to a confused halt. Davis looked from the dead fighter to Eva, his expression one of pure, uncomprehending shock. What was that?" Eva's eyes were already scanning the towering, sun-bleached mountains that surrounded them, searching for a sign, for a ghost. A slow, dawning realization cut through her fear. They were not alone after all. The silence that followed the single, shocking gunshot was heavier than the noise of the firefight. It was a fragile, pregnant pause, broken only by the moan of the wind and Corporal Jensen's ragged breathing. Every man in the ditch, every insurgent clinging to the rocks opposite, held their breath. The rules of the battle had just been rewritten by an unseen hand. Master Sergeant Davis was the first to move, his training overriding his shock. "Doc, status!" he barked, his eyes never leaving the tree line where the enemy had melted back into temporary cover. "Jensen stable for now," Doc replied, his voice tight. "But we need to get him out of here." He pressed a fresh bandage against the corporal's leg. The young soldier's face was pale, his fingers trembling around his rifle. Eva Rostova remained frozen, her knuckles still white on her radio handset. Her mind, a whirlwind of terror and procedure just seconds before, was now laser-focused. That sound. She knew that sound. It was the distinct high-velocity crack of a .300 Winchester Magnum round. A sniper rifle. A professional. Her eyes swept the jagged ridgeline 1,000 meters away and shrouded in heat haze. Who? A lone wolf operator? A missed element from another team? It didn't matter. They were a lifeline! Rostova! Davis hissed, crawling to her side. Who do we have up there? Check your roster. Is there a friendly sniper team in this valley? Ava shook her head, her gaze still fixed on the mountains. Negative, Master Sergeant. We are the only friendly force assigned. Command confirmed it. The implications were staggering. They had an angel, but it was a rogue one. A sudden burst of enemy fire broke the stalemate, but it was different now. It was wild, undisciplined, spraying in the general direction of the ridge rather than concentrated on their position. The unseen sniper had sown chaos and fear into their attackers. Then came the second shot. This one was closer, or perhaps just clearer in the new tension. It struck a man who had foolishly tried to sprint to a new firing position. He crumpled mid-step. The message was unmistakable. Movement would be punished. A new sound entered the fray, faint but unmistakable to Eva's trained ear. The distant thrumming beat of rotor blades. Hope, fierce and desperate, flared in her chest. She keyed her radio. Command, Nomad 01, be advised, we have an unidentified friendly sniper providing support on the high ground. Enemy forces are disrupted. Request immediate extraction and confirm that inbound rotary wing is for us. The response was immediate, the voice laced with confusion. Nomad 01, confirm last. Say again regarding friendly sniper. No other friendlies in your AO. Before Ava could respond, a third shot rang out. This one struck the enemy's heavy machine gun, sparking off the receiver and sending its crew scrambling backward. It was a shot of incredible difficulty and stunning audacity. It wasn't just about killing. It was about dismantling the enemy's capability. Eva ignored the question from command. She saw her chance. The enemy was disorganized, their heaviest weapon silenced. Davis, she said, her voice gaining a new strength. They're pinned down more than we are now. That sniper is giving us an opening? Davis nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. All right, people. On my signal. We're moving to that rock cluster 20 yards to the north. It's better cover. Doc, you and Jensen first. Rostova, you keep talking to that angel on the ridge. Tell them we're moving. Eva looked back towards the imposing silent mountains. She raised her hand, not in a wave, but in a simple, open-palmed gesture of acknowledgement, a signal that she understood. A silent thank you to the ghost who had answered their SOS when no one else would. The scramble to the rock cluster was a blur of adrenaline and terror. Each footfall echoed like a thunderclap in Eva's ears. Doc half-dragged, half-carried Jensen, while Davis provided covering fire, his rifle barking short, precise bursts at any flicker of movement from the compound. Ava moved backward, her eyes darting between the treacherous ground and the distant ridge, her body braced for the impact of a bullet that never came. The unseen sniper was their shield. Every time an insurgent dared to take aim, a single punishing shot from the mountain would send them diving for cover. The enemy was effectively pinned, their confidence shattered. They collapsed behind the larger rocks, gasping for air. The new position was a fortress compared to the ditch. For the first time since the ambush began, they had a moment to breathe. The thrumming of the helicopter blades was growing louder, a promise of salvation hovering just out of reach. Rostova, get me an ETA on that bird, Davis yelled, reloading his magazine with practiced speed. Eva keyed her radio, her voice steady now, filled with a newfound authority. Command, Nomad 01. We have repositioned. What is the ETA on our extract? The response was cluttered with static and overlapping voices. Nomad 01, extraction is 5 minutes out. Be advised, the LZ is still hot. We have no positive ID on your supporting element. Proceed with extreme caution, extreme caution. The words felt like an insult. Their supporting element was the only reason they were still alive. Ava's mind flashed back to a different valley, a different mission. The memory surfaced unbidden, sharp and painful. She had been a junior JTAC then, attached to a team hunting a high-value target. The intel had been bad. They were surrounded. Her calls for air support were met with the same bureaucratic hesitation, the same fearful debates about political fallout. She remembered the voice of her team leader, a grizzled sergeant named Miller, his calm deteriorating into desperation over the radio. Where is our air, Rostova? Tell them we're dying out here! She had promised him help was coming. It arrived 10 minutes too late. They found Miller's body draped over his weapon. The guilt of that day was a permanent scar. It was why she drove herself so hard, why she mastered her craft with the obsessive focus. She had sworn never to let another team feel that abandonment. And yet here she was, hearing the same hollow promises from command. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but it was now mixed with a burning anger. She would not let history repeat itself. Not today. Her eyes were drawn again to the ridge. This mysterious sniper had acted when command had not. That decisive action deserved recognition, demanded coordination. She switched her radio to a different, more discreet frequency, one used for direct coordination between ground elements. She took a deep breath, praying the angel on the ridge was listening. Unconventional ally. This is Nomad 01 on this frequency. Do you copy? She released the transmit button. The only sound was the whistle of the wind and the fading pops of distant gunfire. Then, a crackle. A woman's voice, calm and clear, devoid of any emotion, filled her headset. I copy, Nomad 01. The confirmation sent a jolt through Eva. It was a woman. A fellow soldier, alone up there. The connection felt instantaneous, profound. They were sisters in this fight, bound by the failure of the system meant to protect them. I have eyes on a technical with a mounted DSHK heavy machine gun, the voice continued. All business. It's moving to block your extraction route. Grid 5784, Ava's blood ran cold. That machine gun could shred the incoming helicopter. She immediately understood the unspoken request. The sniper couldn't take out a vehicle with her rifle, but she could guide Ava's eyes. Roger, Eva said, her fingers already adjusting the laser designator on her rifle. I see it. Painting the target now. A silent pact was sealed on the battlefield. The ghost had a voice, and Ava had found her partner. Ava shifted her position, pressing her eye against the scope of her laser designator. The world narrowed to a shimmering, heat-hazed rectangle. She scanned past the compound walls, past the scurrying figures of the confused insurgents until she found it. The technical, a battered Toyota truck with a brutal DSHK heavy machine gun mounted in its bed, was bouncing along a rough track, its driver intent on cutting off their escape path. The gunner clung to his weapon, a dark silhouette against the dusty landscape. I have visual, Eva confirmed, her voice a low whisper into the mic. She centered the crosshairs on the vehicle's engine block and pressed the button. An invisible beam of laser light reached out across the valley, painting the target with a precision only she could see. Confirmed laser spot, the sniper's voice came back, cool and detached. Hold it steady. A moment of silence stretched, thick with tension. Ava held her breath. Her entire world focused on keeping the dancing laser dot fixed on the moving truck. 1,000 meters away, Sergeant Kate Spectre O'Malley lay perfectly still, her body merged with the mountain rock. Through her high-powered scope, the tiny red dot glowing on the truck's grill was a beacon. She exhaled slowly, her finger applying steady, deliberate pressure on the trigger. The rifle roared. The shot was not meant to destroy the truck, but to send a message. The bullet struck the engine block with a loud metallic clang. Steam and smoke immediately began to pour from the hood. The truck swerved violently and screeched to a halt, its engine dead. The gunner, panicked, swung the massive DSHK barrel wildly, searching for a target that was a kilometer out of his range. Target disabled, Kate reported. Good effect, Eva responded, a wave of professional admiration washing over her. The shot was a masterpiece of intimidation and tactical restraint. The brief exchange had changed everything. The one-sided conversation with a distant, uncaring command was replaced by an immediate, intimate dialogue with a guardian angel. Ava was no longer just a voice screaming into the void. She was part of a team again. She relayed the information to Davis. Sniper just took out the technical on the northern route. The path to the LZ is clear. Davis nodded, a look of grim relief on his face. Tell her thank you. It was a simple sentiment, but it carried the weight of their collective survival. The thunder of the approaching Black Hawk helicopter now dominated the valley. It was a tangible, deafening presence, circling once to survey the landing zone before beginning its descent. The downdraft from its rotors whipped up a blinding storm of dust and sand, but the battle wasn't over. The sight of their escape enraged the remaining insurgents. A final, desperate wave of them broke from the compound, firing wildly at the descending aircraft. The Black Hawk's door gunners opened up, their miniguns tearing into the earth, creating a wall of lead between the enemy and the LZ. It was chaos, a maelstrom of noise and violence. Through the dust, Ava saw a figure separate from the others. He was not firing wildly. He was kneeling, taking careful aim with a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. He was aiming directly at the vulnerable underside of the helicopter as it flared for landing. Eva's blood went cold. "RPG, 3 o'clock from the LZ!" She screamed into the radio, but her voice was lost in the rotor wash and gunfire. She swung her laser designator, but the target was obscured by the swirling dust cloud. They were so close. After all this, to be lost in the final seconds was an unbearable thought. She looked helplessly toward the ridge, hoping against hope that her unseen partner could see what she could not. The world slowed to a nightmarish crawl. Ava could only watch, helpless, as the insurgent with the RPG steadied his aim. The helicopter was a massive, hovering target, its downdraft blinding everyone on the ground. Davis was shouting, firing his rifle into the dust cloud, but it was a hopeless gesture. The roar of the engines and the miniguns was a physical force, drowning out all other sound. This was how it would end, not in the ditch where they had started, but on the very threshold of rescue. Then the shot came. It did not strike the insurgent. Instead, the 7.62mm round impacted the RPG itself, striking the warhead a glancing blow. There was no explosion, but a violent spark and a jerk of the launcher as the round tore a chunk from its casing. The insurgent stumbled back, startled and unharmed, but his aim was ruined. The moment of perfect opportunity was lost. In the cockpit, the pilots saw the glint of the rocket launcher and the sudden, mysterious spark. They reacted on pure instinct, yanking the collective and swinging the bird violently to the side. A second later, the insurgent, now enraged, fired. The rocket screamed through the air, passing harmlessly through the space where the helicopter's tail rotor had been just a heartbeat before. It detonated against a rock face 50 meters away in a harmless shower of stone. On the ridge, Kate O'Malley worked the bolt of her rifle with a calm that was almost serene. It had been an impossible shot. Aiming for the weapon itself was a risk only a fool or a master would take. She had calculated the wind, the range, the fall of the bullet, and prayed that the physics would hold. She had not tried to kill the man. She had tried to kill his moment. And she had succeeded. "RPG neutralized," she said into her radio, her voice still eerily flat. In the deafening silence that followed the missed rocket, Eva heard the transmission. A sob of pure relief caught in her throat. She didn't have words. She simply keyed her mic twice in rapid succession. Click, click. The universal signal for acknowledged and thank you. The helicopter settled onto the hard-packed earth. The door gunners continued to lay down a withering field of fire, keeping the enemy's heads down. "Go, go, go!" Davis yelled, shoving Doc and the wounded Jensen toward the open cabin. Eva scrambled backward, keeping her eyes on the perimeter until her boots hit the skid. Strong hands grabbed her body armor, hauling her into the relative safety of the cabin. The moment she was inside, the Black Hawk lifted off, climbing steeply and turning away from the lethal valley. As they gained altitude, Ava stumbled to the open door, grabbing a strap to steady herself. The wind whipped at her hair. Below, the valley looked small and quiet again, the compound and the figures around it shrinking into insignificance. But her eyes were fixed on the distant ridge. She searched the jagged line of rock, scanning for any sign of the woman who had saved them. For a moment, she saw nothing. Then a tiny flicker of movement. A figure, no larger than an ant at this distance, stood up from a carefully concealed position. For a single, breathtaking second, the figure was silhouetted against the bright sky. Then it raised an arm, not in a wave, but in a simple, slow gesture of acknowledgement. Eva raised her own hand in reply, a silent salute across the vast and empty space. There were no medals for what that soldier had done. No ceremony. Her heroism existed only in the space between life and death, in the sound of a single gunshot that had answered when all other pleas had gone unheard. The helicopter banked, and the ridgeline vanished from view. They were safe. The ghost was gone. The roar inside the Black Hawk was a comforting, deafening blanket. It drowned out the ringing in Eva's ears and the frantic, adrenaline-fueled chatter in her own mind. She sat slumped against the vibrating fuselage, the cold metal a stark contrast to the searing heat of the valley. Across from her, Doc was already administering morphine to Jensen, whose face was finally relaxing into a painless sleep. Master Sergeant Davis simply stared at the floor, his chest rising and falling in deep, ragged breaths. The exhaustion was a physical weight on all of them. A crew chief handed Eva a bottle of water. She took it with a nod, her hands trembling so violently she could barely unscrew the cap. The first sip was a miracle, washing the taste of dust and fear from her mouth. She closed her eyes, but the afterimage of the RPG insurgent, the spark off his launcher, and the silhouette on the ridge flashed behind her eyelids. They were safe, but the mission was a tangled knot in her mind, a mix of failure and miraculous success. The helicopter set down at the forward operating base with a gentle bump. The moment the rotors began to slow, a team of medics swarmed the aircraft. Jensen was carefully lifted onto a stretcher and rushed toward the medical tent. Davis and Doc followed, clapped on the back by relieved comrades. The debrief would come later. For now, there was only the simple, profound act of being on solid, friendly ground. Eva remained seated for a long moment, watching the controlled chaos. Her legs felt like jelly when she finally stood, jumping down from the cabin onto the sun-baked tarmac. The base was a hive of noise and activity, a stark, almost surreal contrast to the isolated terror of the valley. She became aware of the grime caked on her face, the ache in every muscle. "Captain Rostova?" She turned. A young lieutenant stood at attention, his face serious. "The colonel would like to see you in the briefing room at your earliest convenience, ma'am." Eva nodded. Of course. The earliest convenience was military politeness for right now. She fell into step beside the lieutenant, her mind already organizing the facts, preparing her report. The walk to the command center felt endless. Every soldier she passed seemed to look at her with a knowing glance. The word was already spreading. Nomad team had been pulled out of the fire. She entered the sterile, air-conditioned briefing room. Maps of the region covered the walls, and a large screen displayed a live drone feed. Colonel Henderson stood over a table, his expression unreadable. He was a career officer, his hair graying at the temples, his face etched with the lines of 1,000 difficult decisions. "Captain," he said, his voice neutral. "Sit down. I'm glad to see you in one piece. Master Sergeant Davis is giving his account to the medics. I need to hear yours, from the beginning." Eva sat, folding her hands on the table to stop them from shaking. She started the report, her voice flat and professional. She detailed the insertion, the ambush, the failed calls for support. She described their desperate position in the ditch. And then she reached the moment that changed everything. "That's when we heard the first sniper shot, sir." Colonel Henderson's eyes narrowed. "The sniper. This is the unidentified element. Explain." Eva took a breath. This was the crucial part. She identified herself as an unconventional ally, sir. She had superior position and observation. She provided precise enemy movements, which allowed me to coordinate our repositioning. She disabled a technical threatening the LZ, and she neutralized an RPG threat during extraction by targeting the weapon itself. The colonel listened, his fingers steepled. When she finished, he was silent for a long time. "She?" "Yes, sir." It was a woman's voice. He leaned back, a frown deepening on his face. "Captain, we have no record of any female sniper teams or any friendly teams operating in that valley. Our drones showed nothing on that ridge." The implication hung in the air, cold and unsettling. The angel who had saved them was a ghost in the system, and sometimes Eva knew the system did not look kindly on ghosts. The sterile air in the briefing room suddenly felt thin and cold. Colonel Henderson's words were not a question. They were a statement of institutional fact. The woman on the ridge did not exist. The life-saving intervention was an anomaly, a problem to be filed away. "With all due respect, sir," Eva said, her voice firm despite her exhaustion, "the evidence is the survival of my team. The shots came from a 300 Win mag. The accuracy was exceptional. She called herself Spectre on a discrete frequency. Spectre, the colonel repeated, the call sign sounding alien and theatrical in the sterile room. He sighed, a sound of weary bureaucracy. Captain, I don't doubt your account of the events. What I am telling you is that there is no official record of this operator. That means she was on a black op, a mission so compartmentalized that even we, he gestured around the command center, are not read in. He stood up and walked to the map, pointing to the ridge line Ava had stared at for what felt like an eternity. Her presence there, while fortuitous for you, compromises her mission. By engaging, she broke cover. She sacrificed her objective to save your team. That is an act of extraordinary courage. But in the eyes of her handlers, it may be viewed as an act of insubordination. The reality of the sniper's sacrifice hit Eva with the force of a physical blow. She had been so focused on her own team's survival that she hadn't fully considered the cost to their savior. This wasn't just about a lack of recognition. It was about potential disgrace, even punishment. What will happen to her? Ava asked, the question feeling small and helpless. Nothing that will ever see the light of day, Henderson said bluntly. There will be no report that mentions her. Your after-action report will state that enemy morale broke due to the arrival of Cass, allowing for a successful extraction. The unconventional ally will be classified as unconfirmed enemy infighting. That is the official story. Eva stared at him, a hot flush of anger rising in her chest. Sir, that's a lie. She deserves to be acknowledged. My team owes her their lives. And they will have those lives, Captain, the colonel said, his tone final. Because she did her job. And now you will do yours. You will write the report that protects the integrity of other ongoing operations and prevents a political incident. You will bury the ghost. Is that understood? The order was a betrayal of a different kind. It was a demand to participate in the same silence that had nearly gotten them killed. She thought of the woman's calm voice, the impossible shot that saved the helicopter, the silent silhouette on the ridge. To erase her was a sin. Ava looked down at her hands, still grimy with the dirt of the valley. She thought of Sergeant Miller, dying because of hesitation and delay. She would not be part of the machine that erased heroes. But she was a soldier. She had her orders. Understood, sir, she said, the words tasting like ash. Dismissed, Captain. Get some chow. Get some rest. The colonel turned back to his maps, the conversation already relegated to a closed file. Eva walked out of the briefing room into the blinding sun. The victory of survival felt hollow, tarnished by the secret she was now forced to keep. The military family she loved had, once again, asked her to forget a sacrifice. But this time she knew she wouldn't. The ghost had a name now, even if it was only a call sign. Spectre, and Ava would not let her be forgotten. A week later, the world of forward operating bases and dust had been replaced by the sterile quiet of a stateside barracks room. The memories of the valley were like a phantom limb, an ache that was always present. Captain Eva Rostova sat on the edge of her bed, a single sheet of official paper lying before her. It was the final approved copy of her after-action report. Every word was a lie. It spoke of enemy disorganization and the timely application of air power. There was no mention of a sniper, of a voice in the static, of a miracle on the ridge. She folded the report and sealed it in an envelope, her movements slow and deliberate. It was her duty, but it felt like a betrayal. She opened her footlocker and took out a small, flat box. Inside, nestled beside the photograph of her mother, was a blank sheet of parchment she used for sketching. Picking up a charcoal pencil, she closed her eyes. She didn't see the sterile room. She saw the sun-bleached rocks, the vast, empty sky, and the stark, majestic line of the ridge. Her hand began to move, the soft scratch of the charcoal the only sound in the room. She didn't draw a person. She drew the mountain itself, the specific jagged silhouette she had memorized in those final desperate moments. She shaded the cliffs with care, capturing the way the light had hit the rock face. In the corner of the sketch, in small, precise letters, she wrote a single word. Spectre. It was not a report. It was a record. A private memorial for an act of courage that would never be honored in public. It was her promise to the ghost that she would not be forgotten. even if her story was known only to one other person. Half a world away, in a different, more secretive military facility, Sergeant Kate Spectre O'Malley sat across from a man in a crisp suit, his face devoid of emotion. The debriefing had been long and grueling. "The objective of your reconnaissance mission was compromised," the man stated, not looking up from his file. Months of intelligence gathering, lost in a single engagement. Kate sat perfectly still, her hands resting on her knees. She offered no defense, no explanation. She had made her choice in the valley. "The political fallout from your unilateral action is still being assessed," he continued. "There will be no official reprimand. That would require creating a record. But your next assignment will reflect this. Divergence from protocol." He closed the file. The meeting was over. Kate stood, rendered a sharp, perfect salute, and walked out. In the silent hallway, she allowed herself one deep breath. She felt no regret. She had seen a team of American soldiers about to be wiped out. She had acted. The cost was the shadow that would now forever follow her career. She would never be trusted with the most sensitive missions again. She was now a question mark in the eyes of her superiors. But as she walked towards her quarters, a different memory surfaced. Not of the shot or the fear, but of the moment after the helicopter had lifted off. She had stood, breaking cover for the first time in days, and looked toward the departing aircraft. And she had seen it. A tiny figure in the open door, a hand raised in a clear, unmistakable salute. A connection had been made across an impossible distance. It was a recognition that mattered more than any medal or commendation. Eva pinned her finished sketch to the wall next to her bunk. The stark lines of the mountain stood in silent testimony. The story of Spectre would never be in a history book. It would never be told in a medal ceremony. It existed only in the space between two soldiers, in the echo of a gunshot that had answered a prayer. It was a story of sacrifice known only to the mountains, and to the woman who would forever look at a sketched ridgeline and remember the day a ghost had chosen to become a guardian. The war would move on, but the memory, silent and enduring, would remain.